Pregame.com.
Sunday, NFL action. The San Diego Chargers travel to the Oakland Raiders. I'm Marco D'Angelo. I'm joined by Scott Spreitzer. Scott, final week, NFL. We got a game that means something. The Raiders need to win, but a win doesn't guarantee them a spot in the playoffs. They need some help. We both got opinions on this one, so I'll let you start it, and I'll counterpunch you. And this is actually going to be my video best bet, so I'm excited about this game. What do you got on it?
Well, it sounds good. You know, the one thing I like is that the three teams that are involved with that playoff potential scenario are all going at the same time, which makes it nice on Sunday. You know, it's kind of funny when I was watching this. I remember back when they played the first time, I think it was November 10th, and Oakland ended up winning the game. They were a 7-point underdog going into the contest. And it was really Carson Palmer's first time of really coming in knowing the playbook because he had played 2 games before that when he wasn't supposed to. He came in because of a quarterback injury, and he got destroyed by the Chiefs. And not fair to judge him on that game, obviously, because he had just arrived basically in the Bay Area. The next week he starts and he gets beat again, but you could tell he wasn't able to stretch the field and do those little things. And it was because, again, he wasn't quite ready yet to be the starter for this offense and was still rusty. But I thought, man, here's his 3rd week now, or 4th week since, as far as practice was concerned, going into that game on November 10th, and thought this was a good time to jump on board, and we did. And of course, San Diego was banged up and injured every which way you can think of, both offensively and defensively, and Oakland went in and took advantage of it, won the game. They won 3 games in a row, starting with that San Diego contest. Then they come out and they lose a couple of games. They go 1-3 their last 4. I'm not so critical of Oakland. Although I don't like him in this game, I'm not overly critical saying, you know, Carson Palmer's a bum or he's overrated or whatever else, or the Oakland Raiders, you know, they're not going to be able to get it together for this game because of who they played in those 3 losses. I mean, they lost road games at a very much improved Miami team. They lose at Lambeau against Green Bay. You know, this isn't a team that just went out and played a bunch of Sisters of the Poor and took the losses in that 1-3 stretch. But now you're talking about a 10-point difference in a line from just about 5 weeks ago. San Diego was a 7-point favorite. Now they're a 3-point underdog. And these whole must-win scenario things, and we'll talk about more of the game in just a moment, but these must-win teams are there because they weren't good enough to not be a must-win team. So, you know, you don't throw in must-win and think will win. But, yeah, I like Carson Palmer. They've got a chance to stretch this defense from time to time. But, again, that 10-point line swing in just 5 weeks, that's what jumped off the page at me at first.
2 things that are going for you here. The must-win, Vegas knows, John Q. Public knows what teams have to win.
Sure.
They're going to bet those teams. It's human nature. So you're going to pay a premium for the Raiders to start with that. Then the fact, let's look at the San Diego Chargers. Everybody bought into San Diego. They won 2 games in a row. Hey, it was Jacksonville and then it was Buffalo. But then they played the Sunday night game against Baltimore. I was on San Diego for the Baltimore game. It was a statement game for them, and they blew Baltimore out. So now everybody believed that the Chargers were back. They were making their annual December run, and they were going to find a way to get in the playoffs. And the road was there. Denver lost in the afternoon last week, and it set it up that San Diego wins in Detroit. They're there. But the thing was, Jacksonville and Buffalo, horrible football clubs. They beat Baltimore. Baltimore is a good football club. They're only an average ball club on the road.
Sure.
You had San Diego go on the road, a West Coast team, go Eastern time zone on a Sunday. Actually, they played on Saturday last week. Go to play a Detroit team that was in a must-win themselves, fighting for playoff seeding. They were the 6th seed, trying to move up to the 5th seed. I actually used Detroit last week. It was my NFL game of the year.
Nice.
And, you know, we got a win there. But the reasons I liked Detroit last week are also going to be the reasons why I like San Diego this week. They got blown out. That gives us more value with the Chargers this week. The reason they got blown out, Detroit to me was an underrated commodity. They were 9-5, and they fell off the radar. After that big Thanksgiving Day game, which got all kinds of hype, where everybody said, this is the team that's going to, you know, ruin the undefeated season for the Packers. Everybody had that date circled, Thanksgiving Day, and they didn't get it done. So then people forgot about them. Then they had a bad game on it was a Sunday night game, I believe, against the Saints. They got blown out. Everybody's getting blown out by the Saints in New Orleans. If you go back and look at their 5 losses, Detroit the 5 losses they had, 4 of the 5 losses were to the top 5 seeds in the NFC. And the other loss that wasn't one of the top seeds was to Chicago when Cutler was still in the lineup, and they were a top 5 seed at the time. So Detroit got San Diego. They got an overrated San Diego Charger team at a soft number. Now this week, nobody wants the Chargers. Oakland's not as good as Detroit. Okay, Oakland has struggled. Last week, Oakland got a win over a Kansas City Chief team, and I had Oakland. I had to sweat that game. Went to overtime. I thought Kansas City was going to win the game in overtime. I just didn't think we were going to cover it. And Kansas City was in a horrible situational spot because they were coming off the big win over Green Bay. That was a natural flat spot. That's why I liked Oakland in that spot. And they got the win, but it was barely. The Chargers have nothing to play for other than they can be spoiler. They don't like the Raiders. Psychologically, it's not going to do anything for them. They're still not going to the playoffs, but they have a chance to get to 500. That is a huge motive because nobody wants to be labeled a loser. 8-8's not a winner, but it's not a loser either. So they can get that win and play spoiler. The Chargers this week getting 3. If they, were getting 2.5, 3 points, the opening number last week against Detroit, and then they actually ended up closing as a 1-point favorite because once Denver lost the early game, everybody poured in even more on San Diego. They're getting 3 points from an Oakland team that's nowhere near as good as Detroit, in my opinion.
Right.
Great line value. I love the Chargers this week.
Yeah, first of all, congratulations on the game of the year. I was with you on Detroit, but I didn't have it as big as you did. But in this particular game, San Diego last week had to go up against Calvin Johnson. Yeah. And yeah, you can burn San Diego deep from time to time, but there's nobody for Oakland. I know they get the speed receivers and they're stretching the field this year since Carson Palmer has gotten comfortable in his role, but there's no, dominating receivers. By one individual where you got to double up against a certain guy and leave somebody else open. And that's kind of what happened with San Diego also last week, besides all the reasons you mentioned. In this particular football game now, you've got to go, first of all, you've got to factor in, like I said earlier, the 10-point line change, the differential from the time before. You've got an Oakland team that's going to have to be able to run the football if they're going to get that, stretch the field and get that receiving game going against San Diego. But what I like about the Chargers here is, you and RJ have talked about motivation on a couple of the segments you did for this weekend, and the Chargers are motivated, believe it or not. First of all, this is a huge rivalry game for what it's worth for this team. This Oakland-San Diego matchup goes way back, and it's funny, a lot of people don't put much credence into pro players having rivalry games. I do too, and one of the reasons I do is I worked with the late, great Jack Snow, former Rams receiver, for several years, and I asked him one of the final seasons that I worked with him, does this really matter? And he goes, you better bet, your bottom dollar that it matters. That these two teams will go at it for that reason. So there is that extra motivation. They're also probably going to not have Norv Turner as their head coach anymore, almost as sure as the sun coming up on Monday morning. They're not going to have him in all likelihood. And a lot of players like Norv Turner. He's a decent guy. He's a player's guy. He's a better coordinator. It's almost like the Peter principle. Better coordinator than he is as a head coach. But they're going to play hard to get this guy a win. The caveat that I have with San Diego, and I'm still going to bet the Chargers in this game, or have already, the caveat is the running game. Matthews is probable, so hopefully he's going to be able to play with that injury. If he's not, they're banged up, their top 2 backs, and that means you're likely to see Curtis Brinkley, who's basically a third stringer, having to get the majority of the carries. But it looks like Matthews is probably going to go. But as I caution everybody when I talk about games that I'm on, make sure in these kind of situations in the morning, if you haven't betted yet, that you've got a good idea on whether Matthews is going to play in the game or not. But Gates is healthy. They're healthy at wide receiver. He can do damage against this Oakland defense. So I expect with the line situation the way it is, with the motivation that San Diego can knock out, for all intents and purposes, Oakland's dreams of going on to the playoffs, I think this is the right side here. And I really like the line differential. And when you're talking about a 5-week swing and you still got your starting quarterback, if Rivers was out, I could see a big line move. But he's not out. And yes, he did have the bad stretch, but half of his offense was injured back then when he was having that bad stretch. So
if San Diego wins last week and still alive for the for the division, this game's a pick 'em at worst. Sure. You might even have seen San Diego a 1-point road favorite in this game.
I agree.
It's ridiculous. So I agree. And one of the disadvantages that we mentioned that they had last week, they don't have this week. They're on the road for a second week, but they're staying in the same time zone. They're not going West Coast to East Coast. So I like San Diego. Scott says San Diego. I say San Diego. I'm making it my video best bet. You know the record on our video best bets this year. We've given you 14 of them. We're 10-4 with the video best bets. We've hit 10 of the last 14. When we give you a video best bet, we also give you a coupon. This week, the coupon is New Year 10. All one word, New Year and the number 10. When you go to checkout, just punch that in the coupon code box. You'll get $10 off your order. And of course, if the package is only $10, then it's absolutely free on RJ. That doesn't happen too often. RJ doesn't like those freebies, but you will get $10 off. For Scott Spreitzer, I'm Marco D'Angelo. That wraps up the NFL coverage for this week. We've got one more video with Scott. We're going to take a look at a bowl game. We're going to do Nebraska and South Carolina, so stay tuned.